Hi, my name is Richard, and I'm here with my wife Yogita. And we're here to tell the story of this house that we built together. And we live on a piece of property about 2.5 kilometers above Nelson, surrounded by a wilderness park, in a Hempcrete House.
And I'm Yogita, and I'm Richard's wife. And it's kind of interesting, when we built this house, this particular house, we'd already been living just further down this property. And when we got married, actually, the first time, 8 years ago, it was right in this field. And when we got here, it was all raw land. So everything that you'll see today, mostly Richard built, created, it was all like just forest and a few fields. And so this particular spot just felt so sweet. Somehow we ended up with building this house here. It's just, this house feels like it's part of the land in a way that when you look at it, even from the outside, it's like it's just nestled right in the right spot. I mean, when we first walked in the round building, we were in Hawaii at a retreat, and we were walking over this property, and we found this round building and looked in the window. This woman invited us in, and we came in, and we were, whoa, this is, I guess, yurt in some ways. We're like, wow, this is incredible. There's a sense of wholeness. It's like everything's held. Everything's held.
It's like we're in a nest of some kind.
Yeah, there's definitely a nest feeling to the roundness.
Like I think of almost every indigenous culture, they found themselves sitting in a circle around a fire, or most of the, whether it's in the Amazon in Africa, so many of the homes and shelters are round. It was just nature's organic shape. And for most of our history, I think as hunter-gatherers, we probably lived within it. And maybe there's something that gets that gets touched in that way. I think, and it gets back to this thing about feeling. And the home that we're moving back into, that was a retreat center, had that same round space. On one level, there's just nowhere, there's no corners for any energy to get stuck. But there's also something about like square structures, 4x8 sheets of plywood, square walls. It's way more efficient. It's faster. It's quicker. And the whole world's set up on that kind of algorithm. And yet you can stand in some of those modern houses and there's no feeling in it. It feels like, okay, this is a place, but it doesn't seem to touch some of these other sensibilities. And I think in these round homes, you can walk in here and there's something else that gets touched that to me feels really rich. So there's something, and I don't pretend to fully understand it, and it's certainly not to criticize or in any way diss square buildings. So many beautiful buildings. I'm just talking about my own experience. A friend who I knew when I was building this said something, and I'm not sure if I got the whole quote perfectly, but he said, when you build your own house, you build yourself. And there was something that I knew that I was building something for Yogita and I that was going to hold us in that feeling way, in the way of things making sense in terms of, it's staying cool in the summer when it's hot and staying warm in the winter. So there was all those, left brain kind of metrics that it had to accomplish, right? Efficiency of some kind, but it was also clear that we're working towards some place that felt right to be in. I've been kind of a lifelong environmentalist and involved in kind of youth climate work, and so at a certain point it just felt important to kind of gather up some of the best ways, some of them which turned out to be old ways, of building environmentally sustainable housing. And I got interested in hempcrete from some research I'd done and just something I'd heard, and actually there was some videos on YouTube where we live in a kind of area that can be prone to summer fires. That's where the climate kind of interfaces in our world. And there was a video of this man holding a propane torch with a flame against a hempcrete wall and just waiting, I think it was 5 or 7 minutes, and it wouldn't burn. So the surface blackened, but the building material would not ignite, and that got my attention. So I started doing a little more research, and then we said, we're going to do this. I think they found bridge abutments in France that are from the Roman times, built out of hempcrete, the Roman version of hemp.
And you said it's been standing for
2 millennia, right? I don't think anyone goes over the bridge still. but it's an ancient form of building using organic grown biomass and combining a large amount of lime. So in the walls here, it's about 10% lime, a little bit of sand, a little bit of concrete, and about 86% biomass. So the woody stalk of the hemp plant and all the leaves that kind of, they used to make hemp rope, so it has all these interesting properties, these characteristics to give the cell structure a lot of strength. Right? So,
over time, right?
yeah, and one of the interesting things, I think this is probably another thing that sold me on building this way is we built a conventional frame, and those people in the construction understand will know. So the frame is what keeps the roof up. So the strength of the house is a conventional 2x6 wall, and then we put plywood forms on either side 13 inches apart, and we poured this mixture. We put some cement mixtures on the roof and had a big ramp with some wheelbarrows, and we mixed up all this biomass, all this hemp stalk and leaf in with lime in these big mixing vats, and then we put it through the mixer, and then we pour it down the roof. So we had plywood sheeting on the roof, and then this goop would flow into these forms 13 inches thick. And Dr. Zeus, I think, had an old book called Bartholomew and the Oobleck, and it's this kind of green gray slime. So we pour the hemp oobleck into the forms, and then you'd be packing it, and within 36 hours it was solid enough so it starts to cure, and then we take the forms off and move it around to the next wall. And then what happens over time is the process by which that hempcrete gets stronger, curing, so it evaporates the water out and it sequesters carbon out of the atmosphere, and the hemp wall becomes more rock-like. So it becomes, at the beginning of this process, the curing or the rigid part of the wall was only half an inch thick, and the insides were pretty soft, right? And then over time, that solidity has gotten thicker and thicker, and I think over decades, that wall will calcify. Not calcify, will draw carbon out of the atmosphere and get harder, more and more rock-like, more stiff. And so it's actually sequestering carbon as we live here. Just my sense of, like, how do we build with local materials, with local skills? How do we do our part so that we're not contributing to the situation we're at as a civilization in terms of climate destabilization? And it just appealed to me on so many levels. So we've got a house that when it could be 40 degrees here in the summer, and this place stays cool because the walls are so thick. And our heating, probably heat maybe 2 quarts of wood a winter. So again, we're pretty efficient with heating and cooling because of the characteristics of hempcrete.
There's something about this home that's just so quiet. It's everybody comments on it when they come in and they spend some time in here. I think it's the thickness of the walls in some ways. And there's also a feel to it, and perhaps living in if it's made of straw bale would be similar. I have no idea, because it's earth component, but there's a real feel of quiet, and there's a real sense of
maybe settledness.
Yeah, it's very settled. It's like it's very held. It's like you feel so held in here, and I don't want to sound too airy-fairy in any way, but everybody comments on here. Everybody that comes in here, and if they stay over and they go, wow, I've had the best sleep ever. It's just there is this sense that this type of home just holds you, holds the energy, holds the home in a very special way. It's very different than any other homes that I've lived in, and I've lived in many, and we've built a few or renovated a few. So there's a quality to it that's quite special, and I've never felt it in any other kind of building.
And I think, like, piggybacking on what you're just saying, it's like we live in shelters that normally separate us from nature. And here in this shelter, which does, like, when it's cold out, it's nice to be separated from nature because we'll be warm in here. But it's almost like the shelter is part of nature, so that we don't feel as separate. Like, it's kind of breathing, and there's this natural material, and it has a beauty to it, and it feels like we're we're harvesting the benefits of being separate from nature, like when it's 40 degrees out, but still having kind of nature flow in and out of our life. And I think that's something kind of special. And I think there's, to me, green building is about what materials will allow you to heat efficiently and cool efficiency and kind of create that sense of home, but what's locally available. This part of PC has a history of hemp growing, usually for marijuana, for stuff that people would smoke, and but there's also lime deposits on the east shore of Kootenay Lake, near Crawford Bay, and I think the innovation is, can we develop a technology that's in some way low tech, but allows us to make hempcrete blocks close to where the hemp is grown. You can chip up the hemp plant, you can combine the lime, a little bit of cement and sand, and then create forms with some kind of thing that compresses them, dries them out, kind of like adult Lego. And then you stack them together and they have a configuration where they kind of fit together. And then you put a little bit of mortar between. And then you create some kind of post and beam, right? There's even Sifco. I know you work for Sifco in Slocan Valley. You know, I know we know Stefan personally, and I know he's had a vision for many years of how do we add value to the wood we're taking out of the forest around here. And so I can imagine, like, home packages, and maybe they're smaller homes, because I don't think we need to build monster houses anymore at this stage in terms of environmental impact and human population, but where you could come up with some designs where the Kootenay post and beam structure infilled with hemp, I think would be a really localized, energy efficient, and cost effective. So there's a lot of, I think, not just efficiencies, but a lot of virtues of that kind of pathway. And I think one of the things that was also compelling for me is when we built this way with hempcrete, most modern buildings, to keep them energy efficient, you need to seal them off, usually with plastic and Tyvek on the inside and outside. But then the air becomes so toxic inside because there's no leakage. So think if you're in a home in January and you don't open the windows, and we have these technologies, they're called HVAC systems, so heat exchange units, and they're kind of high tech and they work really well, but most of the components are made in China, and you're investing in a home that relies on technology to keep it livable. And I didn't want to go down that road. So these walls are 13 inches thick, but the air can move through them, but it moves through them really slowly. So imagine each piece of that hemp biomass has thousands of little cells, and in our body there's cells. In a tree or in a hemp plant they're lignin. So the lignin is the stiff outer wall of the cell, and then inside is the dead airspace. So you've literally got thousands and thousands of these firm edges of the hemp cell with the dead airspace. And so for the warm air to go out in the winter, it's got to go through that rigid membrane into the airspace and through the next one, and that process takes 12 hours or so. So that's what makes it efficiency. It's not that the air doesn't move through, it's that it moves through so slowly that it doesn't give up its heat or cool, right? So it's breathing is what I'm saying. The home is breathing and it's comfortable, and then we don't have to rely on that level of technology I'm not opposed to technology, but I don't want to be reliant on technology that's sourced from supply chains, 12 time zones away. It just doesn't feel like a wise thing to be doing where the world's at. To do this house, we were allowed to by the regional district of the Central Kootenays, but we had to get it engineered. So we had to find a parallel approval process. So I found an engineer in actually Manitoba who had worked with hemp buildings before. We sent him pictures at every stage of the thing, and he'd make suggestions if we need to improve anything, and then he'd sign off on his engineered form, and we'd submit that to the regional district. And as long as they had someone with a certain professional standing behind the building we were doing, they were okay with it. But it took, some creativity, right? So part of what we need in this new ecosystem is also a regulatory environment that makes it easier to build in these kind of sustainable green ways. And we need to empower young people. We need to empower people who want to get creative and think outside the box. So to kind of create systems that have some flexibility, I think it'd be